I woke up to the sound of nothing. No gentle splashing, no faint gurgle of the filter, no shimmering blue reflections dancing on my bedroom ceiling, just eerie silence. Confused, I threw on some slippers and rushed outside, only to be met with a scene so absurd I genuinely questioned if I was still asleep. My pool, my massive, meticulously cared for, expensive backyard pool, was empty. Not a single drop left. The once sparkling, crystal-clear oasis now resembled a dry crater planted smack in the middle of my yard. Then I saw them. A group of HOA members stood smugly at the edge of my property. Leading the pack was Karen McIntyre, the neighborhood's self-appointed monarch of arbitrary rules and unbearable micromanagement. She stood tall with her clipboard, a smug grin stretched across her face. "Good morning, Ethan," she called out, her voice soaked in fake politeness. "I see you've noticed our little adjustment." My brain struggled to make sense of the madness. "Adjustment?" I echoed. "Karen, what the hell happened to my pool?" Karen let out an exaggerated sigh, like I was the irrational one. "The HOA board voted unanimously to drain it. We sent you a notice 2 weeks ago." She motioned toward my mailbox where a blinding yellow envelope stuck out like a flare. I grabbed it and tore it open. HOA violation #237B, unauthorized water waste. Effective immediately. Fine, $2,500. I let out a dry, hollow laugh, reading it over again like it might start making sense. "You actually drained my pool without even asking me?" Karen's smirk deepened. "It's not about permission, Ethan. It's about responsibility. We're in a drought." I stared at her, stunned. "A drought? The city hasn't even declared one." She sniffed. "The HOA has. We must lead by example." I blinked. Example? I flung a hand toward the absurdly lush, HOA-mandated golf course just a few blocks over, its sprinklers still happily misting the air. What about that? Or the dumb fountain at the community center? Or how about the fact that I pay for my own water? Karen gave a forced, patronizing chuckle. "Oh, Ethan, homeowners don't always understand what's best for the community. That's why the HOA exists, to make the hard choices for you." I inhaled slowly, trying hard not to say something that'd land me in court. "You drained my pool," I said, voice low with restraint, "for wasting water. Water I paid for. In a neighborhood that uses more on decorative shrubs than an apartment complex." "That's correct," she said without hesitation. I ran a hand through my hair, trying to keep the fury from boiling over. "And if I refuse to pay the fine?" Karen's eyes lit up. "Then we place a lien on your house." "Naturally." I clenched my jaw so tight I could feel my molars grind. This was the kind of petty, power-hungry HOA overreach you hear about in nightmares. But draining a whole pool? That wasn't just obnoxious, it was a statement. I stepped forward, locking eyes with Karen. "You know, Karen," I said, my voice eerily calm, "I don't think you understand who you're dealing with." She scoffed, clearly unimpressed. "Oh, Ethan, don't be dramatic. Rules are rules." A laugh slipped out of me, sharp and bitter. Not because it was funny, but the kind of laugh that carried a quiet warning. A signal. Because poor Karen had no clue what was coming. I inhaled deeply, the tiniest bit of satisfaction curling through me beneath the fury. "Let me ask you something, Karen," I said, keeping my voice calm. "Where do you think the water in this neighborhood comes from?" Her smug expression faltered for the first time. "The city, obviously." I smiled, but it wasn't a friendly one. "Wrong." Her frown deepened. "What?" I crossed my arms and let the silence stretch. "See, 20 years ago, when this neighborhood was being developed, the original landowners didn't sell the water rights to the city. They sold them to a private investor." Karen's brow furrowed. "What does that have to do with anything?" I tilted my head ever so slightly. "That investor was me." Silence. Heavy, delicious silence. I could almost hear her thoughts scrambling to catch up. She blinked twice, then let out a sharp, brittle laugh. "That's ridiculous." I shrugged. "Is it?" Her grip tightened on the clipboard. "You're lying." "Am I?" For the first time since I'd known her, Karen actually looked unsure. I could see it, in the slight shift of her posture, the subtle stiffening of her shoulders. She didn't know, because HOA queens like her never read the fine print. I twisted the knife a little more. You know that emergency water conservation fee you're about to slap on everyone? I said casually. It would be a real shame if there weren't any water to conserve. Karen's face lost all its color. I leaned in, dropping my voice to a whisper. You just picked a fight with the man who owns every single drop flowing through this neighborhood. She took a half step back, trying to recover her composure. You can't just shut off the water. I smiled again. Can't I? Her mouth opened, then closed. Nothing. I clapped a hand on her shoulder in mock sympathy. Oh, Karen, you really should have read the contract. And just like that, I turned and walked away, leaving her standing there, silent, shaken, and for the first time in her life, utterly powerless. Because tomorrow, the entire neighborhood was going to learn what it meant to live under HOA rule. And Karen? She was about to learn what it meant to live under mine. The next morning, I sat on my porch with a fresh cup of coffee, watching the neighborhood slowly wake up. It was all so perfectly serene. Birds chirping, joggers making their rounds, sprinklers kicking on in neat little bursts. The HOA's pride and joy, the golf course, still lush and green under the golden sun, despite their so-called drought. It was almost a shame all this was about to end. Almost. I took one last sip, pulled out my phone, and made a single call. It took less than 5 minutes for the chaos to begin. The first clue was the sputtering of the sprinklers. At first, no one thought much of it. Maybe low pressure, a maintenance glitch. Then it got worse. Hoses slowed to a dribble before stopping completely. A woman watering her garden looked down in confusion as nothing but air wheezed from her nozzle. Then came the shouting. Karen had no clue what was happening yet, but I watched her storm out in a bathrobe, phone pressed to her ear, stomping toward the HOA office. Other board members soon followed, equally baffled. I sat there, sipping my coffee, as Karen's signature smugness twisted into pure, helpless frustration. Then came the real panic, residents knocking on each other's doors, whispering about the sudden water outage. A guy in gym clothes cursed when his kitchen faucet ran dry. A woman stared at her half-full bathtub like it was the last bit of clean water on earth. And then the HOA's beloved. The golf course sprinklers sputtered and died mid-cycle, leaving the once pristine greens to bake under the unforgiving sun. The ornate fountain in front of the community center gurgled a few times, then fell silent, its once cheerful spray reduced to a dribble of nothing. Karen's voice, usually a syrupy blend of fake charm and condescension, had shifted into full-blown panic. She barked orders at the other board members, but they stood around looking just as lost as the residents. Waving her phone like a wand, she seemed to believe she could intimidate the water back on. I knew exactly who she was calling. The city. Poor thing was in for a rude awakening. I stood, stretched, and strolled toward the HOA office, blending in with the growing crowd of concerned homeowners. Confusion buzzed through the air. Questions flying, voices rising. Karen stood at the center of it all, visibly unraveling. Everyone, please remain calm, she announced, but her voice cracked under the pressure. We're working to identify the issue and restore water as soon as possible. Skepticism rippled through the crowd. Arms crossed, brows raised. A woman in a bathrobe called out, "Oh, so it's an issue now? I thought this was all about water conservation." Karen's eye twitched, her smile a brittle mask. Yes, well, conservation is important, but this is an unexpected infrastructure failure. I almost pitied her. Almost. She spotted me in the crowd, and her expression soured instantly. "Ethan," she snapped, "do you know anything about this?" I let the silence simmer, then offered a casual shrug. "Me? Oh, I don't know, Karen. I thought the HOA had everything under control. Isn't that why you drained my pool? You know, to teach us all about responsibility." The crowd stirred. Whispers. Stolen glances. People were connecting the dots. Karen's composure cracked. "You're enjoying this, aren't you?" I tilted my head, innocent. "You think I enjoy watching my neighbors lose water? No, Karen, that sounds terrible. But I will say, it's fascinating. How fast the HOA falls apart when it isn't in control. She turned away in frustration. Get the city on the phone. Now. One of the board members made the call, his hopeful expression draining as quickly as the water had. The city says, they don't manage our water, he said, barely above a whisper. Karen froze. That's ridiculous. I stepped forward, letting my voice cut through the hush. No, Karen. It's not. Dead silence. I let the moment breathe before speaking again. When this neighborhood was built, the city never actually bought the water rights. They assumed they'd have access. But the developers had other plans. Her eyes narrowed. Let me guess, those plans involved you? I nodded slowly. Correct. The rights were sold to a private investor. I tapped my chest. Me. Someone in the crowd gasped. Karen's face twisted in disbelief. You're lying. Check the records, I said. It's all there. I own the rights to every drop that comes into this neighborhood. The city never reclaimed them. And the HOA. I let out the low chuckle. They never even realized they weren't in charge. The weight of it all hit her like a truck. Which means, I continued, when you drained my pool and slapped everyone with water conservation fees, you were making rules about something you had zero authority over. Karen's fists clenched at her sides. Karen's fists balled at her sides. You can't just turn off the water. I grinned. Can't I? The murmurs grew louder. Whispers of rebellion spread like wildfire. The HOA had always been overbearing, wielding their authority like a weapon, but now they were exposed. Vulnerable. And everyone could see it. Karen's breath hitched, her eyes scanning the crowd. She was losing them. Losing everything. Fine, she snapped. You win. Turn it back on. I clicked my tongue slowly. Oh, Karen, it's not that simple. She stared at me like I'd just slapped her. You see, I said, my voice calm, deliberate, water distribution is a business. And given how the HOA's been running things lately, I'm afraid I can't offer the same courtesy pricing as before. Her face turned a dangerous shade of red. You're holding the neighborhood hostage. I raised an eyebrow. No, Karen. I'm giving people a choice. They can either keep paying you outrageous fees for arbitrary rules and zero value, or they can purchase water directly from me, at fair, reasonable rates. It was a masterstroke. Years of pent-up frustration with the HOA came to a boil right there on the sidewalk. The iron grip they'd held over the community began to crack. An older man, one of the longtime residents who'd suffered under Karen's thumb for far too long, stepped forward. You know what? I'm sick of the HOA. I'll buy my water from Ethan. Same here, someone else said. Another voice. Then another. Karen's eyes widened, panic bleeding into disbelief. Her power wasn't just slipping, it was being ripped away, piece by piece, by the very people she'd lorded over. This wasn't just about water anymore. This was the beginning of the end. Karen looked ready to combust. Her jaw clenched, hands trembling as she tried desperately to maintain the polished mask of leadership. But the illusion was shattered. The crowd wasn't afraid of her anymore. In fact, they were beginning to smile. These were the same homeowners who had once tiptoed around every asinine HOA mandate, terrified of fines or warnings. Now, they looked at her like a bad joke finally run its course. She drew in a breath, straightened her clipboard like it was a shield, and turned stiffly to the remaining board members. We're not finished here, she hissed, before storming back into the HOA office. The others lingered a moment longer, exchanging glances that said everything. Defeat. Confusion. Maybe even relief. Then, one by one, they followed her inside. I didn't chase them. No need. The damage was done. And I already knew what Karen's next move would be, because she wasn't the type to accept a loss. She'd fight back. She'd try to claw her way out. And in doing so, she'd only dig the hole deeper. The crowd began to drift away, but not before a few neighbors stopped to shake my hand, thank me, and ask when they could make the switch. I told them soon. Smooth transition, no rush. Let them sweat. Let the HOA simmer in its impotence just a little longer. Inside the office, muffled voices rose in tense argument. I didn't need to eavesdrop to know what was happening. Karen was barking demands, ordering them to find a loophole, a clause, anything to reclaim authority. But there was nothing. The water rights were mine. Ironclad. Legal. Untouchable. Later that afternoon, an email arrived from the HOA's official account, some laughable emergency notice about taking immediate action to ensure water stability. It was Karen's desperate Hail Mary dressed up in corporate nonsense. I knew exactly what was coming. That night, I sat on my porch, coffee replaced with bourbon, watching as a few board members crept around under cover of darkness. Whispering. Glancing around nervously. Flashlights pointed low. I didn't need to guess what they were doing. I already knew. They thought they could bypass me. Maybe they believed a favor from someone at City Hall would override my rights. Maybe they thought they could broker some under-the-table deal and slither their way back into control. It didn't matter. Because while Karen was scrambling behind the scenes, something else was happening. Something she didn't see coming. The homeowners were turning on her. By the next morning, a crowd had gathered again outside the HOA office, but this time, it wasn't a protest. It was a reckoning. They weren't just angry about the water. They were angry about everything. The fines. The rules. The years of being drained dry for the privilege of being micromanaged. Karen emerged, face pale and eyes tired, but still wearing that fake veneer of authority. She tried to reassure everyone, claimed the city had given her assurances that water would be back on soon. But no one was buying it anymore. Then came the votes. Every HOA has a clause, a rarely used option to call a vote of no confidence. Most people don't bother. They assume it won't change anything. This time, they were fired up. They'd seen the cracks. Now they wanted to shatter the whole damn foundation. I didn't lead the charge. I didn't need to. Karen tried to rally. She called emergency meetings, flooded inboxes with desperate emails, even tried to intimidate people into backing her. It backfired. People were done. By the end of the week, it was official. The HOA was dissolved. And just like that, the air in the neighborhood shifted. Lighter. Free. Bottles of champagne were popped open in driveways. The golf course, once the pride of the HOA, sat dry and abandoned, its silence louder than ever. The overbuilt community center? Just another useless building now. And Karen? She was the last to leave. I saw her standing alone outside the HOA office, staring at the empty parking lot. She looked small. Like she finally understood. She spotted me watching and walked over, slower than usual. No clipboard, no fake smile, no condescension. Just Karen. Just another homeowner. She stopped a few feet away, arms crossed. "You planned this," she said, quieter than I expected. I took a sip from my drink. "No, Karen. You did this to yourself." She let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head. "You think you're a hero? You think the neighborhood's better off now?" I shrugged. "I think people are better off when they're not being told how to live by someone who only cares about control." She rubbed her temples, sighed. "What happens now?" I smirked. Now you find out what it's like to be just another homeowner. No special privileges. No fines to hand out. Just you, paying for your own water, like the rest of us." She gave me one last look. A glare, maybe, but it was empty. The fight had gone out of her. Without a word, she turned and walked back to her house. A few days later, the moving truck showed up. No one was surprised. Karen wasn't the type to stick around after losing control. As the truck pulled away, I raised a glass from my newly refilled pool, watching the last trace of her rule disappear down the street. And with that, peace returned to the neighborhood.